Hey, veterinary friends, welcome to the podcast. Today I have a very special guest for you. Her name is Rachel Teichberg. She is a certified veterinary practice manager, a certified veterinary business leader, and a certified compassion fatigue professional, among other things. She's got more certifications, but I won't name them all. She's the head of education and program development for Veterinary Growth Partners. She's a business consultant, a course developer, a speaker, and a podcaster. She creates interactive leadership training programs that support veterinary practices in establishing or sustaining highly productive teams. Welcome to the podcast, Rachel. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, all the things that you're doing are things that I'm very interested in, and I'm sure all the listeners are as well. So it's going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to sort of get to know each other through this podcast as well. It's going to be really fun.
That's my favorite thing about podcasting is I
Yeah,
meet so many cool people, and I think when you're working in your practice day in and day out and you're kind of working with your head down, you just don't realize how many cool people are in this profession and how wonderful it is.
totally.
And I'm hoping through this podcast that I can bring that message out there to people that listen,
Yeah.
that this is the greatest profession.
Yeah.
So I always ask all of my guests to tell me their story. So tell me the story of how you got to where you are today and doing what you're doing and how you lean towards vet med and all that.
Yeah. So, like many, if not most of us, I, of course, had a childhood dream of becoming a veterinarian. That was my plan.
Yeah.
It was one of those things I didn't really like. It wasn't one of those big things I was drawn to always. It was like, yeah, I'd like to be a vet, but it wasn't like I was in high school working at animal hospitals. Like it wasn't very real when I was a kid. It was sort of
Right.
like a dream, like,
That would be fun because a lot of kids think
yeah,
that, right? Because it sounds
totally.
like a fun job. Fireman, policeman, veterinarian.
Exactly. Yes. So it was always like the answer to that question, but it wasn't necessarily like a driving force in my life of like what I was doing extracurricularly or anything like that.
Right.
And then when it got time for me to go to college, I actually went in undeclared because I was like, I don't know. And a lot of that was actually because I was told often when I was growing up that when someone was like, okay, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'd say, oh, I want to be a vet. And they'd be like, oh, well, it's very hard and it's
Yeah,
you
you
have to have
bet.
straight A's and again, and no one was trying to necessarily dissuade me, but that's kind of what they did.
But
Like
it did dissuade you.
a
Yeah, right?
100%. And so I was
Yeah.
kind of just like, it didn't seem like a reality for me. And I was just, again, I was a good student, but it just kept the message I kept hearing was how hard it was,
The weight of it.
how
Yeah.
yeah, just like you have to study really hard. You have to get straight A's. You have to be 1,000% committed. You have to spend every like living, breathing moment of your life like committed. And when you're between the age of 12 and 18, at least for me, that wasn't exciting. I
Right.
was
That's not
like,
what you want to hear.
I
You
was
want to have
like,
fun.
oh, right, exactly.
Nobody
I was
told you
like,
that it's a really fun job, right?
yeah, right. All they were
Oh,
talking about was the school part of it, which
we
I
need to
totally
change
get.
that. Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, okay. So I went to school, I went into school undecided, and I was taking all these courses in like every subject. And I was just trying to like see like what stuck. And
Yeah.
I've always liked science. And my 2 years of undecided were kind of up. And like, university's
And
like,
they said
time to
you have to
decide.
you have to
Yeah.
choose. Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, or what am I going to decide? And I literally was out to dinner with one of my friends at the time, and I was kind of telling her, like, I don't know, like maybe I should do like psychology or something. Like again, I had no real like I know what I want.
Right. You still
Like,
didn't
well,
know.
no, and she was like, well, like what is it that you've like if you could do anything, like what would it be? And then I was like, well, I always wanted to be a vet, but everyone told me like it was
But
kind of
I
an
couldn't.
impossible dream.
Yeah.
Exactly. And she was just kind of like, well, why don't you just do that? And I was like, yeah, like she was the first person who was like, what if you just did it? And I
Right.
was
Right.
like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so for the next years, I pursued a degree in biology and I did everything I needed to do to prepare myself to become a vet and to apply to really more than become a vet. First step is apply to vet school, right?
Get to vet school.
Because
Right. Right.
like that's its own
That's the first
mission.
hurdle.
It really is like that really is its own mission. And so, schooling wise, I did great. I worked really hard to get all the experience I needed. I worked with large animal vets. I started working in an animal hospital. I went to Northeastern University. They're known for their working programs. Like you kind of work while you're a student and you're still getting
Yes.
college credits for that time. So
Yeah.
it's a great program because, I can actually not have to sort of put school aside to have a part-time job in the area or field that I want. Great for making connections and all that sort of stuff. So I started working in animal hospital during my time at Northeastern, and that was really the first time I ever worked in practice before because again, it just didn't seem like a reality for me. So kind of speed up, it was time for me to apply to vet school. And I started having doubts. And for a lot of reasons. Firstly, I was just married and I was like, okay, so we're potentially going to move to some random place, right? Where I don't have any
Right.
family or friends. My husband won't know anybody. I'll be studying all the time. Is that the right move for us right now? And then that started sort of me having conversations with veterinarians about their experience. And I was, a lot of the questions I was asking was like, of course, student loans were like a big thing. And I already had a lot of undergraduate debt. And because nobody was guiding me through all of that during that
Right.
time.
Right.
So,
You were just doing it.
right. And so I was kind of like, all right, like I already have over $100,000 in educational debt. And this is going to cost me at least another $100,000. Like, why don't I start like probing here and just like seeing what's going on?
See
And
if there's an option.
yeah, and it was a little bit sad to say that I wasn't getting a lot of like, yes, do it. I was getting a lot of
Yeah,
people that
that
were
is
like,
sad.
well, yeah, like it's really been hard, I'm really burnt out. And it really casted a lot of doubt on whether or not this was really the right path for me. And so I kind of hit the pause button and I was like, you know what? Okay, maybe going to vet school isn't necessarily my path. And there was a lot of thinking about that. And really, I was like just about 25 at the time, maybe even a little bit younger than that. And I was like, okay, quarter life crisis, here it is, because now this had been like my mission. And I was
Right.
like
And now what do
doing
you
all the
do?
things exactly. And so, yeah, so I struggled for a little bit. I remember sitting at my computer looking up grad school programs in like physical therapy. I was like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I have this biology degree. I know that I like medicine, especially now that I've been working in animal hospitals, and it really is something I am enjoying.
Right.
So, what other things are there out for me? And yeah, I was kind of just spiraling a little bit, to be perfectly honest. And it was right in that moment where there was an opportunity at the general practice that I was in to become a practice manager. And
Wow.
yeah, so like, I had worked my way through the ranks. Like I had done, started at the bottom at kennel attendant and worked my way
Like
through. So
we
I
all do, right? Start in the
exactly.
kennel.
Yeah, and like, it made sense at the time for me like I had the right experience. I'd been there long enough. I was in that lead tech role. So it was kind of one of those things. And so at first I was not going to even put my name out there. I had sort of assumed that the political realities of the practice were that the tech that was there the longest was just going to get it. And so I was just kind of like, whatever, like she's probably just going to get it. It's fine. And then I was kind of like, you know what though? Like if they don't know that I'm interested, I'll obviously never get it.
Well, yeah, they won't give it to you.
Yeah. And so even though there wasn't necessarily like an open job application or something like that, like we all knew the position was becoming available. I think the person that had at the time was going to vet school. So, one day I kind of moseyed into the owner's office and I was just like, hey, just so you know, this is something that I would be interested in.
Right.
And I ended up getting the job, which was
Nice.
great. And so, it kind of again expanded over time. So kind of started with some split responsibilities and then moving into a bigger role. And so that was really the first time that I noticed that there was a journey outside of being a vet
A
that
veterinarian. Yeah.
interested me and excited me. I knew I didn't want to be a tech forever. Again, like I wanted more than that. And I knew that there was more. I wanted something else. But when you took vet off the table, it was like, well, then what is the next step out of this? I always kind of
Right.
looked at my tech time as a stepping stone to something else. That was
Right.
always my plan. It was never to be a tech forever.
Right.
So so that was the first time that I was kind of like, well, I take this job as sort of like the next step, but I wasn't thinking of it as like my career. And the more I learned about the job and the more responsibilities I got, the more I really enjoyed it. And
Hmm.
like, oh, who knew? I liked numbers and enjoyed talking about the strategy of the business and helping implement changes and all that sort of stuff. So, that was like where I've had to do like my first disciplinary action for somebody, and you
Which
and
is
I
oh
were
so
talking about this
scary.
before. Yeah, like I mean, talk about like the nausea and the butterflies and like all the great like,
Yeah,
and
the
again,
first time you do it, it's bad.
yeah, it is. I'm sure. Gosh, if there was like a camera in that room, I probably would be cringing right now. But I didn't really have somebody who was there teaching me how to do these things. I gave it my best shot. And, for me, it was just like a lot of, just fake it till you make it. Like you
Trial
have
and
to do
error.
this now. This is your job. So figure it out. So I did a lot of that. And again, learn from my own mistakes, learn from, getting feedback from other people, and again, just seeing their response to me. A lot of reflection and being like, I guess I could have done that better. But I learned a lot in that job and how to kind of oversee a practice. And it was like the perfect size, I feel like, for me for my first practice manager role to really get a feel for what that meant. And what was nice about that too is I grew within that practice. So when I became in that manager, that lead, those roles, it was with people who already knew me. There was already a level of respect, right? Camaraderie,
Right. Yeah.
all of that. So it felt really nice to kind of move into that role. But there came a time after that where my husband and I had always dreamed to move to Florida. Well, it was really honestly his dream more than mine, but
You
after
adopted
a
it.
lot of years, after a lot of years of being
It
like,
rubbed off.
we should go. Yes, it became my dream as well. And it's funny because my husband was looking for a job kind of passively in Florida for many years, just to be like, look, if there's a bite, we'll move down. But it wasn't like a very serious search. And of course, me being in this practice manager role, I was like, oh, I'm not even going to bother looking for jobs because like I know getting these jobs are so few and far between. They're so often
You're
promoted from
gonna get it.
within. Exactly. That I was like, I'll just wait for you to get a job. And he was in human resources. Like, you can, those are a plenty. I mean,
Right.
not that they're, any job is easy to get, but there's more of those jobs than there are of these jobs.
Yeah, right.
So I didn't
Exactly.
even bother at first. And then one day he was actually out of town, and I just happened to go onto the AHA job boards just to see. Like, I don't even know what prompted me to do this, but out of nowhere, I just kind of looked and I applied to one job. And after a lot of interviews, flying down from Massachusetts, doing interviews here in Miami, they offered me the position. And so we relocated down to Florida. So
That's
that
nice.
was that was a big deal. And so yeah, so I was fully committed to being, practice manager and staying in this industry because I think more than anything, I found that I love this industry. It's more than just that one job, and everything about it is really speaks to me. The people that are drawn to this industry
Yes.
are just wonderful, and I love, making a difference. I think that that's also such an important piece of that. So whether it is
Yeah.
on the medicine side or supporting the teams that do that, supporting the clients and finding ways to continue to drive the best care was something that just really spoke to me. So that's how I got to Florida. And so that's when I started working at a specialty practice. So that job was also very interesting because I felt like that was, again, the first time I was hired like outside for this practice manager role, and kind of felt like it was like my big girl job, like
You grew up
I grew up like, not only was I just like hired, from someone who doesn't
from
know
the
me at
outside,
all.
right?
Exactly. Like I wasn't just promoted now. I was like, I was taken somewhere else. I proved to somebody that I was like qualified to do this job, which I was, I wasn't lying about anything. But again, it was kind of like a little bit of imposter syndrome where you're like,
Sure.
when are they going to find out that
When
it's
are they
not
going to
me?
figure out
Yeah,
that I just stumbled into this job?
exactly. Yeah. Like I just had a lot of that. And again, it also was going from something I was very comfortable in, which was general practice, to specialty medicine, which
Sure.
even though I wasn't practicing medicine, I was still running a practice that was set up and functioning very different than the one I was used to.
Right.
At the time, they were also building a new clinic. So there was literally like they hadn't even broken ground yet when I started. So that was
Wow.
going to be my project. And, I worked with an owner who was such an incredible visionary. And so, he had dreams of second locations and lots of big things and hosting CE events. And all of it sounded so good. I was so excited about all of it. But again, very much so outside of the work I had done before. So I was just kind of like, yeah, like I'll figure it out, whatever. I've got initiative, I've got drive. I can, I'm scrappy when I need to be. I can do this. So yeah, so I moved down to Florida and kind of hit the ground running. And what was important to me, because this happened to me when I was in practice, and I'm sure you can appreciate this too. You see it all the time. I made sure, like when I was hired there, I didn't want people to know that I had tech skills. Like that was one of my big things, because when you're a practice manager with technician skills, you are so often pulled out of your role to
Yes.
fill in
Yeah.
for
Huge
techs.
danger. Yep.
Yes, yeah. And I was really worried that I was going to be set up for failure in that way, because I knew all the big things that had to get done in this practice, in addition to the day-to-day, that I was like, I need to be able to have a boundary here where I will not be a technician in your practice. And so that was something that like we had agreed upon, because I've seen it happen. And again, now that I'm on a consulting side, it happens all the time, and I totally understand it.
Right.
But that was sort of a boundary that I was like, like, this is a big job to do. I'm going to need every minute of every day. And what I kind of put myself into was, it was more than every minute of every day on a scheduled
Sure.
shift, right? It was a lot of work. So yeah, so that job, it was exciting. It was very different than anything I was used to, really pushed me out of my comfort zone for sure, and allowed me to figure things out and find myself as a practice manager. But what I also did was not listen to my body at all. Other than that one very serious boundary I somehow managed to set, which was like, I really don't want to be a technician,
Right.
was literally none. I had no boundaries. Like the amount of hours I worked, the after hours that I spent, the events that I did, like there was just I really had no limits, and I was a yes girl. And again, it had a lot to do with that feeling of I had something to prove. Um,
Right.
and also, I don't necessarily think that I believed in my own authority in that role to a certain extent,
Yeah.
where
I think on some level you're afraid to say no because you're like, well, if I say no, they'll find someone else that says yes.
100%, right. And again, I felt like, this was my job. I was hired to do these things. And I just wasn't experienced enough in the professional world to feel confident enough to say to the owner of the practice, like, that's a really great idea, but my plate is super
But
full.
it's too much.
Exactly. Or is this actually an urgent need? Or can we talk about this in a quarter? And so I didn't do any
Yeah.
of
The
that.
time
And
frames.
exactly. And so everything was coming at me, and I was like, sure, yes, no problem. Let's do that. And it was a lot. And I really did it to myself. I didn't know how to use my voice really. And in my mind, a lot of that was like, well, he's the boss, he's the boss, he's the boss. And so I just wrote off a lot of that stuff, because like, this is my job. This is what I signed up for. And so inevitably what happened was hair started falling out. I started losing weight. I had incredible fatigue, joint pain, muscle pain. Fell asleep once at a traffic light.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
oh yeah, in the middle of
That's
the day,
scary. Yeah, that's very
really
scary.
scary. So I finally decided to get myself checked out. And it really happened because I ended up in a hospital with a fever that wouldn't go away. And yeah, it turns out that I had lupus. And, a lot of the stress of the job, again, that inability that I had to set those
Yeah.
boundaries,
Mhm.
yeah, created, well, really, it was more like, look, there was always obviously a genetic predisposition, you don't just, pick up lupus, right? But it was activated, that autoimmune disease triggered on. And yeah, obviously it was a big problem. Like I was dealing with a lot of inflammation. I was dealing with a lot of health concerns at the time. So that was my first trip to the hospital. And, again, I was very much like, well, that sucks. But, give me some meds and let's
Here we
keep on
go.
moving on. Yeah, exactly.
Get me
Like,
back on the hamster wheel.
pretty much. I really didn't see or didn't want to
The
see at the
connection.
time, the connection.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I basically was put on a ridiculous amount of drugs to sort of manage my disease while I was not. I was just like, okay, medicine, you do you, I'll do me, and
Mhm.
continue to, slow my recovery because I wasn't slowing down. I wasn't resting. I also wasn't communicating any of this to anybody. So I was just kind of like silently suffering. Obviously my
Oh,
friends and family knew, but I didn't want anyone at work to know. Again, it was like there was a lot of secret keeping in that way for me. It was like I don't want you guys. I kept everybody at like a super arm's length. And again, I think it was just a lot of my inexperience around what are the lines around professionalism and what is okay for people to know. What should I not tell people? But what I think it actually did was make me feel incredibly isolated, and really not like a genuine person because
right. Because you're
I wasn't
lying.
being real with anybody. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
People would straight up look me in the eye and be like, "Are you okay?" And I'd be
And
like,
you'd be like, oh, I'm fine.
"Right, literally." But like, I have like no hair on my
I
head
have this
and I lost
huge
20 pounds.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like literally, my body is telling them I am certainly not okay, but I just couldn't.
Do you think there was like shame involved? Like you wanted to look like you were super strong and you didn't want to
100%.
admit that you had an issue? Because that's what it kind of sounds like to me. It's like, because a lot of us do that. We're
Mhm.
like, oh, we can do everything. And if we have to admit we have a weakness, then we think of it as a weakness.
Absolutely. That
Yeah.
was something that I really felt like it was going to hinder my authority, again,
Or
like
might
make
think
people
less of
doubt
me.
my
Mhm.
capacity.
Yeah,
Exactly. And again, yeah, I think that there was also just a level of denial myself, like this
sure.
unwillingness to be like, yeah, like I
You're not a
have to.
sick person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
You want to be
I
sick.
didn't want to identify that way. I
Right.
didn't, yeah, I didn't want any of it. So I just sort of carried on. And things were health-wise not well. The business, of course, was like we were doing great. Because
Moving.
again, I was putting all whatever energy I had like into that. But I was miserable is ultimately what it boiled down to. I really couldn't do both. And it finally took another trip to the hospital where again, I just like could not get well. Like it was just unfortunately a super traumatic experience where I had to spend multiple days in a hospital. And even then, it's an unfortunate thing, but I ran payroll for my hospital bed.
You didn't get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was unwilling to ask for help. And it's not like my practice didn't know that I was there. Like they sent
Right.
me things like, balloons or whatever.
Right.
Still, I wasn't able to be like, hey guys, I'm in the
I can't do
hospital.
this.
Who's
Yeah.
going to do payroll? You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um, and again, I just it was really like that moment because my husband was sitting next to me. I literally like I had tubes in my arms, like I was like hooked up
And
to
you're
all
on your
the IVs.
laptop.
Yeah, just like doing payroll. Because and then like my husband's like, Rach, like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, what if I don't run payroll? They're not
These
gonna get
people
paid,
have to get
blah,
paid.
blah, blah.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah.
he was like, there's really no one else can do this. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, it just takes me 2 seconds. It's not like, it's not a big deal, right? As we
Right.
say
Not a
so
big
often,
deal. Hmm.
not a big deal. So it was really after that that like we kind of, my husband and I just sort of had this like moment where it was like, you know what, like, no, this isn't right. Something's not right. I understand that I have an illness, that I have to live with, but I don't see any of my other friends at these levels of breaking points. Like something's not
Right.
right. Like it's one thing to have a stressful week or a month or just have a stressful job,
Right.
but the fact that like this has become so overwhelming to my life is just not okay. And really at that point is when I decided I really don't think that I'm capable of doing this job currently while also healing myself. I didn't think I could do it. Like it was
Right.
really more of like I don't believe that I have the skill set or the boundary setting ability or any sort of structure yet where I feel like I could go back to work and actually allow myself the boundaries needed and time needed to rest
Right.
and recover. So I
Yeah.
ended
Because
up
your identity was wrapped up in that job and what it
100%.
was. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
couldn't break it down at the time.
No, and there was also just a lot of like, how did I get here? Like, how did I lose myself? Like, why wasn't I using my voice? Like, there was so much of it that just suddenly became very illuminated, where you're just
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like,
Oh,
why
it all
didn't
made
I think
sense finally.
something?
Yeah.
Right, right. It was
Yeah.
just this like
I
aha
kind
moment.
of think of that sometimes as, I'm Christian, so I think of it as God like knocking on your door saying,
Sure.
honey, if you don't slow down, you're going to die. So let me show you,
Yeah.
like, let me throw you in the hospital a couple times
Yeah,
and until you
right.
get it. Like
Right. It's like not once. No, no, no. I think there's the first time.
yeah.
Got
And if
had to
it's
go
not
twice.
God, it's the universe, like somebody's
Exactly.
talking to you from somewhere telling you to
Exactly.
stop.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the reflection that had to take place, a lot of ownership. I had a lot of blame in my head about like, well, they should have known that this was too much, or they should have asked, or they
The
should have been,
victim. Yeah. You
yeah, and it was
started
just
going
sort of,
into that. Yeah.
yes, very much so the victim. And so yeah, I was just kind of like, this isn't a place where I can heal. So I ended up giving my notice, and I had taken about 5 months off, before I actually started at Veterinary Growth Partners, just so that I could do that work to figure
Right.
out like, who am I? Like, is the version of Rachel that worked in this job really who I am? Because like it didn't feel like who I was. But
Right.
up until that point, I had never really thought much about who I am, like as a person, as an adult, as a human being in this world. Like I never thought about what my values are, what do I want? What do I need? It just
Right.
hadn't, it still seems so silly, but like it just hadn't come up yet, like up until these moments, like things were fine. Like it was
I
okay.
don't think it does. I don't think when you're young, and I can say this because I'm older, I don't think when you're young you think about it. You're just like, okay, well, the next step is to go to college, and then I got to
Exactly.
graduate, and then I got to go to vet school, and then I got to get a job, and then I got to get married and have the kids. And you just like, you're just on this, like, this is what life is.
Yeah.
And until you do have some sort of, epiphany, you don't sit down and say, oh, is this really me? Or is this really what I like or want? Or, and I think that's probably part of life in a way. But if you could make that happen earlier, it would be easier, right?
Yeah, like without some sort of like trauma would be great.
Sure. Yeah. If you could just sit back one day and be like, oh, I'm not being authentic to myself. What
Exactly.
do I want to do? Yeah.
Yeah. And I really felt that. Like I felt, in reflection that I was playing the part of practice manager.
Ah,
You know what I mean? Like whatever vision I had of what a practice manager wears, what a
should
practice
be.
manager says. Yes, the
Right. Yeah.
relationships the practice manager has with her team. And I'm
Right.
sure probably most of it, well, some of it I experienced, I did work in practice,
Sure.
but I'm sure a lot of it also just came honestly from like what I saw on television and, like again, like what these roles are and what I am allowed or not allowed to do or say or whatever.
Right.
So I
Well, and I
definitely
think,
decided, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I think when you say the word manager, it kind of implies that you're in charge of everything.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
and it's really not true, but I think that's sometimes what we think.
Yeah. And look, like I was young, I was figuring it out. Like I said, there wasn't necessarily a mentor that I had that was being, that was sort of mirror to me and challenging some of the choices I was making.
Right.
And again, a lot of it was, I wasn't even willing to see it at the time because I was then just saying, well, this is a job. This is a job. This is the
Right.
expectation. Like, I
Yeah.
can't say no. I have to be there. And
Right.
never asking any of those questions like, okay, I hear you want to do this event. I really can't be there. Who
Right.
else? I
Yeah.
wasn't even
I'm going to
challenged.
put someone else in charge. Like you didn't learn how to delegate.
Exactly. Nope, nope. And so, yeah, it just all became way too much. And so, yeah, during that time, I figured out a lot about who I am, what do I need, and what do I want out of a career. One of the big things is, of course, I'm like, yeah, like I can live with lupus. That's not a problem. I just need to still find the right job. I need to develop new habits. To make a promise to myself to show up differently and more than anything, to say the things I need to say. Like
Right.
I need to become more aware of the subconscious signs that my body is telling me. What I've learned after now all these years of living with lupus is like my body tells me all the time when something's not right. Or it's, if I'm too stressed or if I'm not feeling great about someone or something, like I get all, and all of us do.
If you're
It's
paying
just
attention.
exactly. And so I found out that I really needed to lean in more to listen to my body, to be my own advocate. I advocated for myself in a lot of ways before, but again, the permission slips I was giving everybody to, treat me a certain kind of way or whatever, those had to go.
Right.
That had to
Yeah.
stop.
Well,
So
because
I learned a
you
lot.
feel like when someone in your practice asks you for something and you just say yes,
Mhm.
you're basically training them to bring you every little tiny problem.
Oh, yes,
And
yes.
that,
And
that's
I
probably what you
talked
do.
about, no, and it's funny because I talk about this one moment when I was in that practice where I was that person. I was that yes person. Literally, anything goes wrong, anyone sneezes the wrong way, I get a
Yeah.
knock at my door, right?
Right.
Somebody,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
she blinked at me funny,
In
like
there.
to make
Yep.
sure that, that she's not mad at me.
Right.
Anything. And I was like, yes, 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 yes. Literally, always up and down, up and down. And so this poor girl, one day I'm sitting at my desk and she knocks on my door and she was like, hey, Rachel, the printer's broken. And I was like, and like I like that was like the moment. I was just,
That's when you snapped.
I know.
Like,
And she's
I'm
like,
not a, I am not
and
a printer fixer. Get out of
exactly.
here.
Yeah. And she was kind of like, and I thought like maybe you could fix it. And I was just like, okay, no, like, can you at least give it a try and then get
Figure
back
that
to
out.
me if this doesn't, And of course, she never came back because it was probably like a simple fix, But again,
Right.
like just like you'd said, it was I had trained them that they are incapable of doing anything on their own, and that
Right.
any single thing that happens, I need to know about it and I need to fix it. So I had
Right.
created my own monster. Like this was
Yeah.
all me. I did this. And again, that was one of those things where it took me a lot of time to be willing to stop blaming everyone else for the position that I ended up in and taking the ownership about the part that I played. Because at the end of the day, I could not stand behind myself and be like, you did everything you could. I didn't do anything. All I said was
Right.
yes all the time. So,
Yeah. Well,
so I
I
allowed
want
them.
people out there that are in any kind of leadership position, even if you're not the practice manager or you're not the veterinarian or the owner, in any position in the practice, you have to hear this because it is such an important thing. And if you always try to do everyone else's job for them because you feel like you're being nice or you're a people pleaser or whatever, and we'll talk about some of that hopefully, but it's like you are doing them a disservice because then they don't feel empowered.
Mhm.
I had this one receptionist that was very insecure, and she would always come to me and say, Dr. Capel, can I schedule you an appointment at 4 o'clock tonight? And I'd be like, I don't know. That's your job.
Yeah,
You're the receptionist.
right,
Like that's what I would just say because it's like, that's why I hire you. You figure it out. Can you
right.
schedule me an appointment? I don't know. Go
Yeah,
figure it out.
totally.
But just if you don't do that, then every time she needs to schedule an appointment, she's going to come to you. And if a couple times I say, that's not my job, it's yours, she's not going to keep doing it. And then she's going to feel like if she schedules it and I didn't like it, I have to suck it up and just go with it because that's what I told her to make the decision. So I think
Yeah.
it's a really, really important thing for people to understand about leadership is you
Yes.
have to let other people do the job that they're hired to do.
100%. And that's just it. Like we hire smart, intelligent, kind people, like let them do their job. Like to me, we're doing everyone a disservice when we take away these choices because again, I feel like I'm a good example. We've all probably experienced this to some degree, but by me being a practice manager who's basically saying you're not capable, I hate to think that that translates then later into your personal life. Like suddenly the confidence is gone, right? And like, it's hard to compartmentalize. Oh, I'm a really confident person outside of work, but at work I'm not. I don't know that that's really super possible. So like
No,
to
I don't
me,
think
it's
it is.
like, if you're getting the message that you're not trustworthy, you're not good enough, even if no one's actually saying those words, but by the action of me basically being like, you are incapable of solving any problem, everything has to come to me,
Right.
there's sort of this learned helplessness of like, oh, I can't, I'm not even, my brain isn't even saying, let me see if I can fix this printer on my own because
Right.
I
Right.
taught them, don't even think.
Don't even
So,
try. Yeah. Whereas
exactly,
if you had been the type of leader that let them be autonomous and make decisions,
yes,
you would have never even known that printer was broken. Like
exactly.
that's the kind of leader I kind of drove myself to be. It's like, I don't want to even know. I
Exactly.
don't want to know how to run blood work. I don't want to know how to, if you can fix all the problems without bringing them to me and I just find out later what happened, that's a beautiful thing.
Totally.
Oh
Yep.
yeah, yesterday we had this terrible problem, but I talked to the client and I straightened it out and I'm like, boom, then that's what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just, again, in this story that I made up in my head about being a practice manager, I was doing the job that I thought it was. And
Yes.
so I had to kind of forgive a lot. And more than anything, I had to, in that time I took to myself, I had to honestly just forgive myself for all of it. It really wasn't until that moment that I realized. I looked in, and it was really because one of my friends, and she's also an incredible life coach. Her name's Tracy Litt. She said to me, she was like, and since I've heard this, but it just was
It
exactly what I needed
clicked.
to
Yeah,
hear.
that's what
She was
life
like,
coaches do for you. They make your
exactly.
brain click and you're like, oh, didn't think of that.
I know. And she said, she was like, resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that's how I was feeling about
Yes.
literally the entire working experience, the people I worked with. Like I was in such a dark place when I left, because it was after that aha moment I had in the hospital, being like, oh my God, like what am I doing?
Right.
I rather than blaming me, I really did blame everyone else. Like they did
That's
this to me. Like, and
that's so
so
common.
yeah, because it's the easy way out. It's
Well,
hard.
right,
It's
because
hard to
nobody wants to
look
take
at yourself.
responsibility for
Of
themselves. Yeah,
course.
it's
It
a
is.
very hard thing to do.
Yeah. And so when she said that, I was like, oh my God. Like, yeah, like that resonates. Like I don't know what I'm doing. Like the fact that I'm
Right.
projecting so much on everyone else and not at all thinking about all of the things I didn't do, right? Because in my mind, it was like, it's a lot about action. And so in my mind, like I didn't do anything. But again, I didn't do anything.
Right, right. Yeah, it was your
Didn't do anything.
responsibility to get
Exactly.
all that responsibility off of you, and you did
Yes.
not.
I did not. And I am responsible for me, and I'm also responsible for my experience on this planet. And I
Sure.
can't allow other people, right, to dictate whatever that means, and or give all of that over to them, right, and take no responsibility myself. So
Mhm.
that was one of the biggest, probably like one of the most important moments really in my life, where I took ownership for the part I played and was finally able to just let it go. Because at the end of the day, like there was so much I was holding on to about everything that had happened over the last 2 years. And honestly, all the things I didn't say and all the things I took on that I probably
Shoulda,
shouldn't.
woulda, coulda. Yeah.
But again, it's like from a health and wellness perspective, right? Like that big negative ball of energy, I was like dragging it around with me. And just like
Yes.
that, like it was poison. Like I was
Sure.
never going to heal physically or mentally, consistently drinking that poison every time I was thinking about my experience in the past. And
Yeah.
so it really, like, once I was able to, recognize the role I played, forgive myself for the choices I made at the time that led me to where I ended up, I felt truly like a weight off of my shoulders, where it
Mhm.
doesn't even come back, and again, it's been many years now, but like even like shortly after, like once I was able to really release that, like because I had really confronted it all, felt super at peace with it. I was like, you know
Yes.
what? I recognize what I did, and everything I didn't do, everything I didn't say, all the choices that I made that led me to where I was. And I'm going to come to peace with that. I'm going to forgive myself. Rachel was doing the best she could at the time.
Right. And
And
that's
now
always
she
the
knows
case,
better.
right? That's
Yeah.
always true. Now,
Yeah.
did you realize all this like in that 5 month period when you were between jobs? Like, did you do the work and get therapy or coaching or whatever? You said you had
Yeah.
a life coach. Is that when you came to this realization kind of gradually, or was it just all of a
Yeah.
sudden one day you were like, oh, I'm being stupid?
That's a great question. I honestly, that whole resentment comment from my friend, that was like a immediate, like, oh wow, like
That was the
okay,
key.
that was a one very big moment.
Yeah.
However, the work is still happening, right? Like it
Sure.
started then, but it has never stopped. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, and one of the incredible things that we do here at Veterinary Growth Partners is actually emotional intelligence training. And so I have had a nonstop, continuous education in emotional intelligence. Literally, 2, 3 times a year, we do conferences and workshops on it. So like, it is so in my face all the time, which is
Yes.
such a gift because like it's easy to read a book and be like, oh yes, okay, I'm going to do that, and then like you put
Right.
it down and then you like live your life. And but here
Right.
it is a constant reminder. I teach this stuff, right? And again, proof I'm not perfect. Like, I don't come from a
Well, I
perfect
think
place. And
that's an
yeah,
important point. No, none of us are.
right.
Like it doesn't matter how many letters you have after your name. It doesn't matter how many, like I'm a life coach, how many people I've coached, you still are always a work in progress. You always have your own work to do.
Yes. But I
Yeah.
think what's so beautiful about doing that work and doing so much self-reflection, and again, in so many ways, like you said, yes, like of course I saw a therapist, and
Right.
I do still see a therapist on and off, like when I'm starting to feel like I am.
When you need an adjustment.
Yeah, or again, like an unbiased, because my sister's also kind of in this space, and so like we
Sure.
can also support each other a lot.
Yeah.
But like I try to take advantage of all the tools that are available to me, and recognize that I am definitely still growing, and I am not perfect by any means, but I do feel like the experience that I had in practice is something that, to some degree, I think almost everyone in practice feels, like or has
Sure.
done. Because again, it's like I consulting with practices, I hear this too, people that are taking on everything, or people that aren't willing to empower their team, or get frustrated when their team isn't just making decisions. We have to have that conversation. Well, why do you think they're
Right.
not making choices?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. You have
and
to figure it out, right?
yeah. And I think that what was really cool about joining the VGP team, especially at the time that I was that I really wanted to support practices, right? Use my experience in the literal day to day, of course, and helping them manage a business, but also focusing on this bigger picture, this like I'm a person picture, like the whole of me, that to run a successful business is more than just numbers on the P&L.
Sure.
Like we have to take care of ourselves. We have to think about our teams as well. And how are we making sure that they're feeling whole, and and that they have all these opportunities, and that we're teaching them also about how to be a person in this world too, like I felt like, again, just like you said, I was young when I was first starting in the industry, and I didn't necessarily I wasn't necessarily ready for a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
And what I think is so great now is through a lot of these conferences and trainings that we can do, we are able to hit a much younger demographic of people that are in practice now, that are in their 20s, that get
Right.
to learn about this sort of introspective work, self-awareness, and how do I manage my emotions when I'm at
Yes.
work.
Right.
Because that's the juicy
That's
stuff
magic.
where,
I know.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I do what I do. I was like, hey, if I could, I learned this stuff. Well, I mean, I kind of learned it by trial and error, kind of like you from
Mhm.
doing. But then I've always kind of been interested in the emotional intelligence and the self development and the leadership training. I've always kind of leaned towards that anyway. But when I started to get into life coaching, it was like, wow, this is the magic part. Like
Yes.
when I can tell you that you can change anything just by thinking about it differently, I'm like, boom. And then you believe it and you're like, oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
Just like your friend said that one thing and it
Yep.
cracked open your brain and you're like, oh, I just changed the way I thought about it. That's all you did.
Yeah.
And it's so magic. And that's why I started doing what I did, because I was like, all right, everyone needs to know this. Everyone needs to be life coached. Everybody needs to like jump into this world, because,
Yes.
your life in vet med and even your life out of vet med is so much better
Yeah.
if you do some of these things.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's just it. It's transferable. I'm not
Mhm.
just learning about emotional intelligence
Yeah.
at work, like these are things that once you can't unknow them. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, now once I've developed a certain level of awareness, like that's not just going to disappear. Now, granted, doesn't mean I am perfectly aware of everything all of the time, but
Can't be.
right, exactly. But
Mhm.
I feel like I can often catch things, at least in reflection sometimes.
Sure. Yep.
I even still feel like sometimes, like, especially at home, work and home are two very different different things, right? And
Yeah.
we hear this all the time, right? It's a lot easier to be more emotionally intelligent at work. And again, I almost question when people say that to me. It's like, well, are you being more emotionally intelligent or are you acting more professional? And those to me are two very different things because,
Yes.
shutting your mouth because, your boss is there, right, is one thing. But shutting my mouth because I'm recognizing that I'm being overwhelmed by my feelings is very different. And
Yes.
though you get to the same place, right,
Hmm.
where you're
Yep.
acting appropriately at work,
Right.
right, which is
Right.
what
Right.
we want,
Yeah.
like, the reason for it is very different. And so knowing, you're at least aware enough to recognize the behavior I'm exhibiting is not appropriate to do in front of my boss, let's say, okay, that's cool, but you're not necessarily doing the work where it's like, well, why am I feeling this high level of anger when,
Right.
right in this moment? So I think that that's really the big piece of the puzzle is that it is easier at work for people. But again, I think a lot of that does fall under that
Professionalism.
professionalism. Exactly.
Right. Well,
And
and if you swallow it at work, it's still there
well,
and
that's
you
the big
take it home
thing.
with you.
Right.
You didn't really process it and get rid of it.
Exactly.
You're hanging on to it. And then you go home and, unload to your husband or unload to your kids or,
Mhm.
so in order to process it properly, you have to have that level of emotional intelligence to get through
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And it's not always like fun and easy, right? I mean, sometimes like it is hard to look at yourself and it is hard to have some truths spelled out in some difficult ways sometimes.
Mhm.
And I try really hard, to practice what I preach and to do the work and to be more mindful of my own feelings and to because again I am no different than everyone else, but what like for me it's just a matter of my body will not react well to unmanaged like high level emotions. It
Of
just
emotions, right?
exactly. And
Hmm.
again, I don't think anyone really does. It's just that for me, it might be more noticeable than for someone else, right? And it might seem
Right.
like someone's tolerance, let's say, is higher, but damage is still being done in some way, right? You're not
Of course.
sleeping, your eating's off, your mind is racing all the time, thinking about that situation over and over and over and over. Like that's not
Yes. Yeah,
healthy.
you're ruminating.
Right. And
No.
so I feel like in a weird way, having lupus has forced me even more so to become so in tune to what my body's feeling, what's going on, how I'm reacting to something. If I'm feeling anxious, like I know that like if I start to like get that anxiety or high stress, I know that there's going to be some sort of like physical like issue that I'm going to have later on that day or whatever. Like it's so closely connected. So it's like if I want to keep my lupus in check, I have to keep those things in check,
Right.
which is um like a gift. I honestly like it kind of sounds like a weird thing to say, but it has forced me to be aware of what's going on. And then again, I get to choose, like, am I going to do something about this? And again, doing something about it can be really short term. Like, I'm very lucky to have a job that I love that's very autonomous. I work from home. And so I have that luxury of being like, okay, like I am feeling super overwhelmed right now. I can either pretend this isn't happening and plow through, which believe
Like you
me, I do
normally would
sometimes.
have. Sure.
Exactly. And I
Yeah,
still
we all
sometimes am
do.
guilty of.
Mhm.
Or I can be like, you know what? Why don't I just like step into another room for a second or step outside of my balcony for a second and just like, get some fresh air or take the dog for a quick walk or do something to
Kind of
just
bring it
separate
down a
myself,
little. Yeah.
right? Manage this feeling in a productive way. And that way I can come back to it and feel fine. So I now have a working environment where that's allowed. And in that time that I had off in thinking about, again, the values, things that I want and need from coworkers, from a company, I was really able to, thankfully, find a group of people that truly align with who I am. And a lot of promises I made to myself about, I'm going to do this differently.
Mhm.
And it's funny because I didn't, no one knew that I had lupus at work for a long time. I still was dealing with a lot of, like you said, shame around having this and worry that people were going to judge me for it or not give me
You as
opportunities
weak.
or right, exactly. Right. Yeah. Like think I'm sick
Oh,
and
she's sick. Yeah. People don't want
exactly.
to be thought of as sick.
No, of course not. I mean,
Right.
it's, that's not my identity. Like
Right.
I don't want to be labeled like that.
Sure.
And so I, of course, hit it because again, and you're always like, well, like you don't want your employer to know anything and well, like, all that nonsense.
Which is ridiculous. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I kept it all a secret. And so it wasn't actually until my first conference that I spoke at for emotional intelligence, I was doing the self-awareness piece. That was the part that I was going to be presenting. And it was my first time really. I had presented one other time before, but for a very short amount of time. So here I was like getting up on a stage for the first time and I was preparing and I was like, I don't know if I can talk about this without talking about having lupus. Like it just
Right.
seems like a sham.
Because that's authentic. And yeah,
Exactly.
you're
Right. Like
lying if you're not saying it,
exactly.
right? I know.
Yeah.
It's such a weird place to be in, but it's true.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
so I kind of like leading up to it, I let my boss know that I was going to say because I didn't want to like drop that bomb on her in the middle of a workshop. But
Yeah.
but I decided I was like I think like this that was the big moment where I felt like I could own my story and not feel judged for it, not feel like people were going to change their opinion of how, capable I am as a person.
Right.
I felt like, you know what, like I've already proved to everyone like I am who I am. Like me, but
Right.
this is just a piece that I'm living with, right? It
Right.
doesn't define me at all. It just is it's a thing.
Right.
And that's really all that it is. And again, it's also like a big part of it for me is not giving it that much power. Like it's
Right.
not like it's just like, yeah, like I live
Yeah.
with this thing. It's
Yeah.
annoying. Wish I didn't have it, but whatever. You know what I mean? It is
Right.
what it is.
Right. It's just like, it's really just like anything. Like everybody
Exactly.
has something.
Yeah.
And it's like
Right.
you just,
And
yeah,
it's
gotta
funny, like
be accepted.
even my sister once, she was like, Rachel, you're not special. And I was like, thank you. Like, like
That's a
sometimes I
great way
need
to
to hear
say it.
that.
Yeah. I
Yes.
think that's a
Like,
good line whenever you're in that pity party is I'm
yes.
not special. I'm just human. This is human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. She's like, we're all going through something. And I was like, you're
Right.
right. Like, that's just it. And once again, I found myself putting so much weight into something and again, hiding something. And it was
Sure.
just like, no. So that was sort of the big reveal of like, I have to share this piece of me because again, like if I'm going to connect with somebody, how could I cut this part of my whole story out? How could I
Sure.
cut this part of my life experience out? And a reality that I live with all the time. And so, yeah, it has become really a whole new sort of way of living my life, of working, of being in the workplace, and I truly believe that I am happy with where I am in the sense of like all of those things I didn't say before, all of those times that I assumed somebody understood something about me. Like I don't do any of that anymore. That is Rachel from back then who's learned
Right.
her lesson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'll say what I need to say and I'll advocate for myself and I'll use my voice. And, like I said, I work with a group of people who are also very receptive to that. That's part of the culture that we've built. And I
Mhm.
feel very lucky that there is that safety in knowing that I could go to my boss, say how I feel about something, and not have that worry of like, what are going to be the repercussions for this? Like we have a trusting relationship, and that feels really good, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. I love that. Now, if somebody is out there and they're listening to this and they're kind of feeling like they are where you were before had your 5 months and really tried to figure out what you wanted out of life and where you wanted to be, um, what would your like first step for them be, or what would you advise them to do right from the get-go if they're listening to us and they're like, oh yeah, I'm exactly where she was and I need to do something about it, but I don't know what, because that first step is I don't know what.
Yeah. I honestly think that if I had to like pick out of like all the things, I would actually choose talking to somebody.
Mm,
So whether that is a life coach,
yeah,
like what you're doing,
absolutely.
any sort of consultant or a therapist or anybody who you can just get it out. I think that like to me, I just felt like like if you're having enough awareness of like something's not right, but I just don't even know what to do,
Yeah.
I think I would have benefited a lot had I started talking to someone right away.
Sure.
My first step was actually reading a Brene Brown book, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Which is
close.
good. That's a
Yeah,
good
which
thing
is
to
pretty
do.
good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, reading her book started to move a lot of things around and to like get me rethinking things. But
Mhm.
again, it's what I did, as the main part of my job for a long time was working one-on-one with practices and, working with individuals. And I'm sure you see this too. It's sometimes you just need that unbiased understanding of, okay, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Here are some ideas. Have we thought about this? What if we did this? And I think that what's very cool, and therapy is great. And I think that a therapist can also do that. But what's great about having somebody like us that
As
has
a
the
coach. Yeah.
experience, yeah, we know actually the realities of working in practice. Like we
Right.
understand the context that you're
Sure.
working in, right? We've
Yes.
lived this, like we get
Yeah. And it's different. It isn't, I mean, I'm sure if you work as an MD or a nurse or something, it's similar, but it is a whole different type of work environment. And people that don't work in it don't really get it.
Yeah, because what I'll tell you is like all that time that I felt like I was drowning, a lot of the advice I was getting from my friends and family were like, well, why don't you just do less? Or why don't you just say no? And like, I, in retrospect, hear what they were trying to say. But
Right.
again, that's not their job, is it? You know what I mean? They're not,
Sure. And it's
they,
not as simple as that
it's
sometimes,
100%.
you
And
know?
like literally when someone had told me, they're like, well, why don't you just care less? I was like, what? Did you just hear what
Yeah.
you said? How does one just choose one day
Not to
to
care. Right.
care less? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I care about my job. Like,
Sure.
there was, people were doing their best to help me, but I wasn't talking to the right
The
people.
right person. Yeah.
Yes. And so I think that had I found someone while I was even in that job, it would have made all the world of difference.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I actually, again, talk about like, having all my walls up. I was working with a practice coach at VGP when I was at that practice. And I was, even with that person, so afraid that if I said anything, somehow it would get back to someone else. Like again, there was so much fear around.
Right. There was no, I can't think of the word, but there was no confidentiality. You like thought that if you said something to them that everybody would know, and that's not what you want. And that's not what you need either.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so though now being in the role myself, right, and of course gaining so much wisdom from her, so much so that I wanted to work for them. I mean, that's really
Sure.
why
Yeah.
I even worked at or applied for VGP was because I had her as a coach. And for in my personal experience, used her so much more as a professional coach. Like, okay, I need help creating a strategic plan. Like
Right.
because again, I was like so much stuff. I was like, oh my God, like
Sure.
how do we
Some
organize this?
help
How do I
and
get other,
direction.
yeah, like how do I get other team members involved in this? Like, so she was really helpful in helping me solve at least getting more people involved in the vision that wasn't just me and
Mhm.
having a certain level of accountability in the practice that, we were working on all that stuff. But I wasn't willing to let her in on a personal level. And so, yeah, I think that could have been a game changer. Absolutely for me is to talk to, talk to the right person
Yes.
that can actually help you get through these challenges, that know where you're coming from, can hear you out, and can really, again, hold you accountable. Because I think that's the big thing, right? Like you can read a book, you can watch a webinar, and that all sounds really good, but am I doing the thing today? Am I doing it tomorrow? What about in a week and a month and 3 months and
Right.
six
Am
months?
I doing
You
the
know,
work that I need to do to get better and figure
exactly.
all this out and understand
Yeah.
yourself better? And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I loved it when I was, recently seeing a therapist, and she was she was like, okay, the next time you have a conversation with someone, I want you to, right, do whatever it is that we were talking about. And I was like, okay. She's like, okay, because I'm going to ask you about it at our next call in a week,
Well, yeah.
you
And
know?
then, and if that's going to happen, you have to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
And you know what? Like, yeah, it was super uncomfortable and I didn't like it in the moment, but it was important for me to do. And was it easier for me to not? We can all make the argument, sure, except I ended up in therapy. So, like, something still
Right.
was right. I wasn't able to solve it on my own. I needed somebody who could see it from an, for what it is without
Right.
all the emotional and historical cloudiness that comes with a
Yes.
lot of situations,
Mhm.
and give me just some very clear advice as to here's some things we can do. And again, she didn't come up with all the ideas. A lot of it was collaborative too. And I'm
Right.
sure that's a big part of what you're doing, right?
Well, and
It
it should be. I
bouncing
mean,
off.
it should be
Yeah.
collaborative because the way I was taught is all the answers are in there. Like
Hmm.
we know what's right for us. We have all the answers. The problem is our brain, our negative brain is so powerful that we can't get to them.
Yeah.
And so if you have someone from the outside talking to you and asking you questions and, well, what is your brain telling you? What do you think? And then you discover that, oh, the whole reason that I'm not, progressing or doing X, Y, or Z or feeling better is because I have these thoughts that are holding me back. And
Yeah.
so an outsider can see that where you can't always. Because whenever I get coached, I'm like, I can't figure out why, I can't get started on this article. I've been procrastinating for a week and I can't get going. And once you start digging in, you're like, oh, okay, you're afraid that you don't have a good idea, or you're afraid that you're not it goes back to, your story of not being a good writer or whatever. But
Exactly.
it's just helpful to have someone on the outside trying to help you figure out what's going on the inside. And it's just, it helps so much.
Yeah, yeah. And you're so right. Like my sister and I actually joke, like whenever we're choosing to clean the house over doing a task, there's something's up. Nobody wants to be
Nobody,
cleaning the
nope,
baseboards, right? So like if you
no.
put your hands and it's cleaning the baseboards,
Yeah.
what are you avoiding?
Right, exactly. You're obviously afraid of something else that
Exactly,
needs to be
yes.
done and you're not doing it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, we've been going on for quite a while now. So there's so many more things that we have to talk about. I want you to talk more about emotional intelligence. I want you to talk about conflict resolution and all that. But since we're getting along, let me just ask you this question. What did I not ask you that you think is really important that we should get out there on this podcast? And then we can always come back and do another one on a specific topic if you're willing.
Yeah. I think that we sure covered a lot. My whole history, I think, uncovers a lot of common situations that practice
Absolutely.
managers are in.
Hmm.
But I think more than anything, I felt this in practice, and I want anyone who's listening to also understand that you're not alone. Like I felt so lonely when I was in practice, and again, very much so in retrospect. Like again, it's just super isolated. When I was in general practice, we, like many communities now, like there were a lot of competitors, and there was this like, you know, very much like us versus them. There was not a lot of like, hey, let's talk, hey, let's do this. And so I think that one of the beautiful things about being, a practice coach before I moved into education and program development, especially, is just breaking that wall open and being like, you are not alone here. Like, don't feel like you have to figure this all out on your own. And again, like that was a hard path to climb. Like,
Sure.
taking a lot of educated guesses about what I should or should not do or how I should or should not handle a situation. It just doesn't have to be so hard and so lonely. So
Right.
if there is somebody out there who is feeling that isolation, reach out. Like the veterinary community is so warm and so welcoming. And
You're the
again,
best.
that's the best. Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's why I fell in love with it. It really, yes, of course, working with animals is such a great joy,
Yeah.
but I am a people person,
Yeah.
right?
People.
I
Yeah.
I
People in
love
this career.
people.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I just think that that there's a community out there for you. It's just a matter of finding your people and
Right.
asking for help, being willing to ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, so contact me or contact Rachel, and then we
Exactly.
will help you find if it's not us, like if we're not the right people for you,
Yes.
we'll find you the right people. It really, really is one of the best things I think you can say to someone is you're not alone,
Yeah.
because it does feel isolating, because you can't talk to your employees, you can't talk to because you feel like you're supposed to be in charge and all the things you said earlier.
Yeah.
And just to have somebody to reach out to, whether it's someone like us or someone in your area that you know, or a
Yeah.
vet school friend. I mean, just start somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. And there might even be a local practice managers group to join, share
That's important.
ideas. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we had a great one in my area for practice owners. I learned so much from those people. Yeah.
yeah, and that's just it. It doesn't have to be combat, with the veterinary practices around the corner. You
Yeah.
guys are actually facing a lot of the same struggles. And so I think that there's a lot to be learned, like you said, from each other. And it's a willingness to just stay open-minded, hear what other people have to say, and support each other more than anything.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so tell us quickly about Veterinary Growth Partners and where to contact you if somebody wants to reach out to ask you a question. If they want to see us do another podcast, they can leave us a comment because
Yeah.
I would love to do it again. I'm having a great time talking to you, and it feels like it just flew by. I'm looking at my clock. I'm like,
I
wow,
know.
it's
I totally
crazy.
agree. I know. We
Yeah.
could talk for hours and hours. I
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. Yeah, and I have all these questions and I've been writing down questions, so I don't know how I'm ever going to ask them all.
That's right. On episode 80,
Right, right. Well,
Veterinary Growth.
I do this every week. So if you want to be a recurring guest once a month, I'd be happy to have you back.
I love that. But yeah, so I work at Veterinary Growth Partners. So we're a management services organization, and really our big focus is education. So we do a lot of CE, live CE, online CE. A big focus of ours is strategic planning, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution. But of course, we do cover all areas of practice management. So that is our area of focus. And we also do one-on-one practice coaching. So we do work with practices, whether that be with leadership teams or individual, like practice manager or owners. And again, doing all those things, either creating a strategic plan or, again, just dealing with the day-to-day fires. Sometimes it's hard for practices to think about a strategic plan when they feel like the house is on fire. So
Right,
we can help kind of deal with those things first, help them overcome whatever challenges are being faced, and then, support them in sort of a long-term plan. How do we get them to achieve the goals?
yeah,
Every practice owner has that vision, right? What are we working towards? So we help there. And then, of course, there is that group buying option too. We do have partners. So it's kind of like the cherry on top of everything that we do. It's like, oh, and by the way, we can save you some money. So that's always really nice. But yeah, my role as the head of education and program development is to really focus on all of the programs that we're putting out there into the universe. I already mentioned some of the big three. One of my passion projects right now is actually our well-being series. So I mean, I
mm,
could have a whole conversation about that, but that
absolutely.
has been sort of my baby where we're inviting in experts in wellness topics outside of the industry to come in and share with us their level of expertise. Because, I'm sure you've been to workshops where they're like, okay, so you got to sleep more and eat better and exercise and breathe. Go. Yeah,
Yeah,
good
go
luck,
do
right?
it, please. Go
Yeah.
do it. It sounds so easy.
So
Or meditation, that's always
exactly,
my
yeah,
favorite.
meditate. And everyone's like, okay, yeah, okay, fine,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so what I've been doing is bringing in these experts, an expert in breath work came through. I had
Yeah.
somebody come through in women's health. I have somebody in just a couple weeks coming to do personal finances and money mindset.
Oh,
So
I
things
love
like
that.
that. Yeah. So I've got someone coming early next year for sleep. So I'm just super excited. So I'm like,
Yeah,
we don't have enough time and we're not the people necessarily to teach someone about how to sleep well and what habits you need and how we
right,
can change things there. So I'm like, well, what if we, it's still I'm glad we're having these conversations and we're illuminating this for everybody. But how about we bring someone in to really teach us the how? And so
right.
that's been a really, really fun project. I love our wellness series so much.
That's
And it's just so cool to get other people and perspectives in.
right.
Of course, they're all like, oh my God, like you work in the veterinary industry. Like everyone's so
They all
happy.
love
Like
vets, right?
they do. They're so happy to be a part of it. Like it just they are like overjoyed to have the opportunity even to present to the incredible people that make up our industry. So
Right. Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
really
So
feel good
if you're
thing.
a veterinarian and you're listening, just know that the rest of the world thinks we're awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
I said, where
So
can you go to
great.
a party and people light up when you tell them what you do?
I know. And it's funny. I had somebody at the house earlier today and I was wearing a jacket that said Veterinary Growth Partners. So he saw it and he's like, are you a vet? And as soon as I said no, you could see the little disappointment. I was like,
Oh,
he
that's
was
so
like,
mean.
oh. I was like, I work in the industry, but I'm not a vet, and he was,
Yeah, but I
we
do
still
work.
talked about his dog for a long time. But yeah, like he was like, are you a vet? I was like, no. I was like, oh, okay, well,
Yeah,
vets
he
are
really
very
he wanted to
cool.
ask you questions about his dog,
Yeah,
probably.
probably. I know.
Well, this has been super fun. I've loved every second of it. I think you need to come back.
Yes, I would
I
love
know
to.
you're busy, so you might have to say no, but if you
Yes.
have time,
No,
we'll
I would
try to
love
get
to.
back together again and I want to talk more about conflict and I want to talk about emotional intelligence, all the things, and in
For
the
sure.
wellness stuff too.
Yeah, yeah, that's been
Talk
really
about
cool.
all of that. And
Yeah.
I've loved hearing your story. I think it will definitely help someone.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me. This has been so fun.
Yeah, it has. So everyone, this is Rachel Teichberg. Did I say that right?
You did, yeah.
And I really appreciate you all listening this week. So take some of her advice and go out and do some of these things so you can feel better. Have a beautiful week, everyone. Bye. Bye, Rachel.
Bye.